Hello, and welcome to Tenant Action Today, brought to you by Met Council on Housing, the citywide tenants union, and also brought to you by Manhattan Neighborhood Network. My name is Michael McKee. I'm a member of Met Council on Housing, and I'm also the treasurer of the Tenants Political Action Committee. I want to show you some photos. Would you believe that this is public housing? This complex was built between 1927 and 1930 and is therefore more than 90 years old. It's still operating as public housing today after being renovated and upgraded. This is Karl Marx Hof in Vienna, Austria. It is home to more than 1,300 families and has a kindergarten, a library, a laundry, pools, stores, a clinic, a pharmacy, and a post office. Here's another public housing development in Vienna. This was also built in the same period as Karl Marx Hof. You can see that it was designed by a top architect and was constructed of the highest quality, unlike public housing in the United States. And here's another. Between 1923 and 1934, the city of Vienna built more than 60,000 permanently affordable apartments and almost 400 buildings, and they're still being operated today. This was done under a socialist government, which took control of the city following the end of World War I. During this time, the city of Vienna also enacted universal health care, child care, protection for workers, and many other progressive reforms. This 15-year period is referred to as Red Vienna. In 1934, the socialists were ousted in a military coup organized by fascist forces in Austria, and the building of social housing stopped. But in 1945, after the end of World War II, the Socialist Party of Austria won control of the city of Vienna again, and since that time has never lost a municipal election, even as the country as a whole has turned to the right. Today, more than 60% of Viennese live in either public housing owned and operated by the city, or in subsidized housing funded and supported by the city. The housing is mixed income, unlike in the US, where public housing is considered housing of the last resort, only for low-income people, and neglected. Only the highest income Viennese are not eligible for social housing. Consequently, the program enjoys wide political support, and it's mixed use with daycare centers, kindergartens, gardens, playgrounds, and small businesses such as dentists and pharmacies as integral parts built into the development, as well as public art. It's a very different housing market, and the city adds new social housing every year. Vienna consistently tops the list of the most livable and affordable cities in the world. In October, I joined a delegation of 48 people, all but a few of them from New York State, who traveled to Vienna to study its social housing programs and to begin a discussion of how we can develop social housing in New York State. Organized by the Action Lab, the delegation included grassroots tenant leaders, housing advocates and planners, state legislators, and delegates from 1199, the Healthcare Workers Union. Most of the New Yorkers were from the 5 boroughs, but we also had delegates from Buffalo, Rochester, and Ithaca. Over a 5-day period, we saw multiple social housing developments, some of them so-called legacy projects from the 1920s and 30s, some of them brand new, some still under development. We met with city officials, planners, academics, labor leaders, and community leaders. A rough calculation leads me to believe that we walked at least 5 miles. On this program, we're going to talk to some members of the delegation about what we saw in Vienna and what lessons we can bring back to New York. Our first guest, Arcia Weaver, coordinator of the statewide Housing Justice for All campaign, and Samuel Stein of the Community Service Society. Sam, welcome.
Thank you, Michael.
We're talking about Vienna. What was your impression? What are your takeaways from our field trip to Vienna?
Beautiful city. Wasn't a place that I'd been before. It was a place that I've been hearing about in terms of social housing for years. people around the world have been inspired by what they've done in Vienna for a very long time. And so it was great to see it for ourselves. And I think, the thing that hits you first is the scale of the social housing, the beauty of the social housing, and the ubiquitousness that it's everywhere.
All throughout the city, yeah.
I would really agree. I mean, it was a little bit surreal to be there, and it was surreal to be there with such a large group of people. When we got back, I was joking that it was hard to figure out how to navigate the world as one person and not moving around just as a group of 50. But I was just also surprised by how easy it was to navigate the city, how even though we were with such a large group, it was really easy to keep everybody together. The public transportation is incredible. The distances are small, and it was really sort of completely transformative social housing all over the city, right? So it's not as segregated as it is here in the U.S. and everything is close to everything, and it seemed like it was great. I'd also never been there before, and it was fun to experience it in this special way.
It's a wonderful city, and it's frequently every year there's a poll about the most livable cities, and Vienna always comes in either number one or number two. And this year it came in number one again as the most affordable and the most livable city in the world. The quality of life is clearly very superior. Not that they don't have problems, and they have many of the same problems we have, but it was quite what to do. And you're right. I mean, keeping people together and not losing anyone when people were staying in different places. We were not all in the same hotel, and it got a little dicey a couple of times, but we didn't lose anybody. So I think the basic thing for me is that Vienna treats housing as a necessity, as a social good, as a human right, not as a commodity to be bought, sold, and traded, to be profited off of. And that to me is like the fundamental difference in what their approach and the approach that the city of Vienna has taken for the last 100 years and what we do in this country. So to me, decommodification is the key here.
Yeah, I mean, I think that decommodification is certainly part of it, but what I was really struck by is how much the social housing relies on a vast welfare state that exists beyond just the housing. So in addition to a robust social housing provision, there's also robust universal childcare, there's robust healthcare, there are all these other community facilities that are embedded within the social housing projects and developments, stores, restaurants, healthcare facilities, childcare facilities, all that kind of stuff. And all of the social housing, of course, works because it's been really woven into the fabric of the city over many different periods, both in the Red Vienna period in the 1920s, but since the Second World War, there has been the Holocaust. There's been a sort of shift in how they provide the social housing, and while it's still decommodified, of course, it's not the same as simply just saying that housing is really a human right. It's part of their economic strategy to keep companies operating in Austria as global competition has put additional pressures on like European Union states, and it really is not. It's not housing that's meant to solve a housing problem. It's housing that's meant to solve a set of social and economic questions for the Viennese government.
Yeah, and that's an interesting thing because they're making their city, their country more internationally competitive, not by austerity. So the way that the US, the UK, a lot of other countries have approached that question of globalization is by cutting down on labor standards, cutting down on environmental standards, cutting down on taxation. And what they're doing instead is reducing the actual cost of living in a place, which then creates less wage demands. At the same time, we learned that something like 97% of workers are under a collective bargaining agreement. So they also haven't undermined their labor rights regime at the same time as they're becoming more internationally competitive. So I think there's something to be learned there. And just in general, Michael, you were saying how it's often voted the most livable city. In the US, at least, when we talk about livability, it very quickly becomes something that we have to pay a premium for. Nice, walkable areas with good public transit are often very expensive. And so you therefore can't afford to live in them. And so what is livability if you can't afford to live there? I think this is a model of prioritizing the livability by making it actually affordable to live there, and then everything else can follow.
Yeah, and it's really kind of remarkable. Rents are low by any standards in Vienna, which means that businesses don't have to pay, their employees a lot to. They still have a good quality of life, and they have all these social services, healthcare, education, and of course, many of these. What I saw and what I think was really kind of extraordinary is some of these places we visited. The services are embedded in the housing, like they have daycare centers, they have kindergartens, they have small businesses like dentists and pharmacies. It's right there. Like in some of these projects that we visited are essentially little cities within a city where you don't have to go searching for a supermarket or a place to get your shoes fixed or things like that. Also, the other thing that struck me was, and I've read about this, of course, but we saw it in action, which is the role of the Socialist Party. The Socialist Party of Austria, which has controlled the city of Vienna government since 1919, with the exception of the fascist Nazi period when they were deposed, and they've been in power ever since World War II ended. I don't think any of this would have been possible, any of this social housing in particular would have been possible without the party, the Socialist Party, making it happen. Can you address that a little bit?
Sure, I can start. I think that was true, quite remarkable. I will say that the Socialist Party it's a social democratic party. It's not a socialist country. It's a socialist party that's in control of a city in a capitalist country. And during the period of municipal socialism in Red Vienna, the social housing was really a way that the government, the socialist government after the First World War, was propagandizing socialism and their form of socialism, right? Because many different other places in Europe were experimenting with socialism at the time. They were propagandizing their form of sort of bread and butter, working class, providing goods to the working class, that sort of form of social democracy to the people of Vienna. And by providing beautiful social housing, they were saying, you should vote for the Socialist Party. This is who you should be supporting to run the city in this sort of period of turbulence. And one of my favorite anecdotes from the trip is we learned at our tour of Karl Marx Hof that Karl Marx Hof is like this long, like several city blocks, skinny and long building. And it has these giant archways. And on the other side of the archways, they also built sort of a public gymnasium and a giant public soccer stadium. So workers would come and they would want to go to the soccer game. And to get to the soccer game, they had to walk through the Karl Marx Hof and see this like beautiful thing that the Socialist Party was doing for you. They were often doing it in collaboration with labor unions and workers. So I think it's really like a collaboration between a socialist political party and trade unions that produced the social housing of Red Vienna. In the period after fascism, the motivations of the SPO somewhat changed, right? And it's a party that's continuing to try to stay in place, but stay in place as the European Union is forcing neoliberalism and encouraging liberalization of the economy. and that social housing changes as the sort of vision and the makeup of the party changes. And that's something that we saw while we were there, right? The rise of the sort of limited profit model. And now today, under pressure from the sort of like left wing of the party in Vienna and the socialist youth movement, they've returned to building municipal public housing, which is something we also got to see. And that's been really exciting. So I think the social housing is not free from the economic pressures and the sort of political pressures that socialists face all over the country, but it's certainly true that the party sees itself as using housing to propagandize what they think socialists should be doing for people all over the city. And I also just think that's not that different from what we do in the US. Although in the US, we propagandize our vision of politics through housing through the form of like really subsidizing private home ownership. So so thinking about housing as a tool of political propaganda is something that I certainly took away from the trip.
Yeah, I think that's true, but also that even the U.S. Democrats didn't do a great job of showing those homeowners that it was because of government action that they got what they got. And so you had this turn away from New Deal support from a lot of working class Democrats who became homeowners and then became conservative and sometimes Republican in order to sort of enforce the regime that they had. So the Social Democratic Party in Vienna has been very good at connecting the really great public good that they've offered through social housing, through all these other collective benefits that we've talked about, to the party and convincing people that that it has to be there. I think a few times members of our delegation asked people, what would happen if this went away, or how come this hasn't been divested? And the answer over and over again was, we'd be out of power in a minute if anybody touched this. So the only thing that's maybe comparable is Social Security in the US, which is very hard to touch. Medicare to some extent as well, to the point that Republicans often don't say out loud that they want to go after those things, even as they undermine them.
Although they're saying it now.
Yeah, right.
Which brings us to the issue of income mix, which one of the striking things about Vienna is that, unlike this country where public housing is, only for the very poor and segregated, in Vienna, only the most affluent Viennese do not qualify for social housing, and higher income people can also qualify, and there's a mix of incomes within the buildings, which apparently is one of the reasons there's so much support for social housing in Vienna. What do you think about that?
I mean, it was really interesting to see that the statistic I remember was that 80% of Vienna's residents qualify for social housing. So only the richest fifth is out. I think I've been in a position where I've been fighting for, very low income development because there isn't enough very low income housing in New York. And this is a problem for us, that on the one hand, we need to be fighting for housing for the lowest income because that's who's not served. On the other hand, we need to be broadening these programs so that they can, serve everybody and build a broad constituency that is hard to take down.
Like Mitchell-Lama. Mitchell-Lama.
Although Mitchell-Lama, is middle-class housing. Like Mitchell-Lama really is similar to the Mitchell-Lama program. I think another interesting thing about the income mixing in the social housing, though, is that there's a robust sort of social safety net around it as well. In New York and in the United States, people become homeowners because that's how they think they're going to be able to have stable retirement. That's how they think they're going to be able to leave something behind for their children. That's how you're going to really build wealth over generations. And sometimes I've been thinking about this, like if we really want to have social housing or move away from commodified housing in the US, we really need to think about what are we doing to strengthen the labor movement? What are we doing to strengthen all these other sort of public sector services that we just rely on private housing to provide for us?
Yeah, that's all very good points. One of the things that I was interested in hearing about on several of the stops we made was apparently the way the city of Vienna is now financing new developments relies on a mix of market rate as well as subsidized housing. Like Seestadt, for example, if I remember correctly, in Seestadt, something like it's a 2/3 subsidized, 1/3 market rate mix. This is an entire new city on the north side of the Danube River, built on the site of an old airport, which I remember something like it's going to house 12,000 people, something like that eventually. But it's not all subsidized. It seems to be like they're relying to a degree on the market now.
Yeah, and in some ways that reminds us of inclusionary housing like we have in New York, only in the reverse. You're not including a little bit of affordability, you're including a little bit of market rate. And it shows that that model can work if you have a zoning regime that caps the price of land when it gets changed from that airfield to the housing. That's what enables that scale of social housing to be mixed with a small amount of private housing.
Next, we're going to talk to three tenants who were part of the delegation to Vienna. I'm pleased to introduce Dorca Reynoso of Met Council on Housing, Renette Bradley of Housing Organizers for People Empowerment, and Winsome Pendergrass from New York Communities for Change. This trip to Vienna was the first time any of you had been to Vienna. Tell me what you thought. Dorca, you start.
Well, it was eye-opening. The first day there, one of the speakers mentioned how getting an apartment was not a thing. So during the very first talk, I was not in shock, but in shock.
Yeah, you could actually get an apartment in a reasonable amount of time.
Yes, it was just amazing to see how incredibly different. I mean, I knew it was going to be different, but I wasn't ready for that.
Renette, what's your takeaway, Renette?
The first impression is your best impression. And my first impression of Vienna was the train station. That was the first place we encountered. And I was so amazed and so comfortable, and it was clean. And I just felt like I was safe there at the train station, someplace where I'm not safe in my own country. And then just to hear a lecture official and a government person say housing is a human right, that touched me.
Which we heard from a city official.
Yes.
Yeah.
Every one of them, yes. So it was my first time going to Europe. I've never passed London, so I was excited beyond measure, and carry a lot of winter clothes. Didn't get to use them, but I was so impressed. As I keep telling you, last night we had our chapter meeting, and I started off by saying I went to Vienna and I started looking for trash. And I left Vienna after 8 days and I didn't even find a cigarette butt on the street. So that is to say, I was so impressed that a government could run a city so clean. And as Renette said, the train station, that's like a culture shock. It really happened. There is cafe. You could eat in the train station and not hold your nose or getting upset because somebody's coming to bother you. And the whole concept was so new, so fresh, so innovative, and it keeps me asking the question, why the richest country in the world can't do something like that?
Amen.
Yeah, that's true. The transit system there is quite amazing. I mean, I don't think we ever waited more than 4 or 5 minutes for a train.
For a train, yes.
It was like amazing that you could go down to the subway stop and within a few minutes the train would come along, and in addition to the subway, they have this incredible system of trolleys, trolley cars all over the city. So you know, we had trouble sometimes figuring out exactly where to go and how to get there, but once you master the system, it becomes so easy to get around, and you don't need a car. Yeah,
I call it hop on, hop off.
Yes. You know what else? You know what else I liked it, y'all? I liked that it was an honor system, that we could go on the train and the police don't grab you behind your back. Every time I walked, I was like looking over my shoulder, because that's what we used to. We're not used to walking on the train or nobody. It just was so much trust.
They don't assume everyone is a criminal. They don't assume criminality right off the bat.
And
the first day I got the ticket, and I see people walking into the train station, and Amy said, "Let's go," and I held up the ticket. I held up the ticket to say, "Is there a camera to see if I have a ticket?"
Oh my God! When we went to the we went to the amusement park, me, Michael, and Louis, and I couldn't find my ticket. And I couldn't find my ticket, and I was so nervous. I was like, "They're gonna lock." Louis like, "Nobody's gonna lock you up. Take your time."
You found it. No, it's true. That's the only time the entire week that we encountered people who were checking to see that you had actually bought a ticket. We had all bought weekly passes for 17 euros. And one of the striking things that I remember is that, I don't remember which city official it was who told us this, but they have a program that anyone in Vienna can buy a yearly pass for 365 euros.
Yes.
Which is basically $365 now at the current exchange rate.
Right.
And ride unlimited rides, and you know, you never have to swipe in or show your card or whatever. It's just get on, get off. Really quite remarkable.
Quite amazing. And then you know what else I was amazed about, Michael? I was amazed that they had luxury apartments, luxury housing. And the things that was in the housing we have here, but they're not for us. That it was for the low income. It was for the middle class. I just think that they had so much care for their people that I wanted to be one of their people.
We were all saying, "Can I move in?"
Yeah. The construct,
housing.
No segregation amongst like low income and like higher income. So you have everyone mixed in. No stigma where rich, people with the higher income live here and lower income live over there. So they take away that stigma from the whole housing.
The construct of how the city operates, of buying up the land. When I heard about the rail yard, my mind instantly went to Hudson Yard, and I said, "Dang, if only our people in America thinks about the citizens and not only think of the millionaires, then we could have had the same construct." When I see how they thought of every little thing, that show you how progressive they are. So for you to build a housing complex, no cars in the middle of the complex.
Yes.
To show you how forward thinking they are.
Yeah, and the way that they think about people when they're instead of profits, it's obvious in everything that they do. Like you see how people, when we visited the Karl Marx complex, and that young man was giving us the tour. The young man was maybe 21 years old, and he already had his own unit.
He was 22,
he was able to move out of his parents' home into his own unit, go into school with, doesn't have to pay for school, didn't have to worry about moving out and being independent. Like people in the States don't understand, like we keep complaining about crime, right? And then refuse to understand how interconnected like housing is related to this. Like we keep creating a crisis. Like I firmly believe that our government allows landlords to create a crisis of housing. Like, look at how we're housing all this, about 88,000 units. And then we say that we need to just build more instead of using those units that are already there. So we're in this crisis where we don't allow people to develop. We don't allow people to thrive. And if you don't have a home, how are you supposed to study? How are you supposed to find a proper job? Like, it makes no sense. They talk about the economy, but if people were able to pay lesser rent, money that they spent working, they would be able to spend it in their community, in their businesses, in the business around them. So our whole system makes no sense.
My thing is that they had no stranger danger. The little kids wasn't afraid of us, where our little kids here would never speak to you. My grandchild would never say, he would wave and peek at you, but just don't want to hold. No, I like that the space they had for the children. It was so much space. And like Miss Winston, I was very impressed because I'm afraid of cars. My sister said I need to take public transportation all the time. So that area would have worked for me, for no cars. And I would have been very safe, and my child would have been able to run. I was very impressed with Vienna, very.
Yeah, but that's part of how they also, you can see how they think of people, and instead of the profit, like, people feel safe having more children if they choose to have a family. I was amazed in the number of people, of the children that I saw, like, so many people have children there. Why? Because you have daycares, kindergartens in the buildings. Like, you don't have all these roads or passing through near the buildings, and so people can safely be with their children outside. So there's all these safety measures that they think of to make families feel safe. It's just everything that when they think about building, it's with quality of, not just quality of the building and innovation, but quality of life for people.
Yes. And let us not forget that one member of our delegation got sick. And when we insisted, myself and Michael insisted and said, let's go to the doctor, get checked out. And she was amazed. We all were amazed. She said it took her 20 minutes to be registered, looked after, got a cane, got medication, and it never cost her anything. And when we talk of countries like that, people would be talking about, oh, communist country, socialist country, you don't get good this, you don't get good that. We are a testament to say that's not true. There is quality of life, and they are thought of. Yes, they have problems. Yes, there is problems. And, a little racism here, a little racism there. We are sorry for our members who did encounter it, but I am thankful that our leaders among us opened it up, we addressed it, and we get our healing right there.
Yes. I was glad that, we encountered that, but it wasn't as bad as it is here, and we didn't let that stop us. We still came and accomplished what we came to do. Like I said, I just want to move to Vienna. I told everybody about Vienna. When last night we had a meeting, our regular community meeting, they want to know so much. It was so many questions. And that was one of the questions they asked Miss Winston, was about the medical. Mm-hmm. So I was so glad. I said, wow, I never thought of that. And I was so glad that he did ask, and I was able to tell about Violet. Violet,
yes.
I was glad that I was able to go on this trip, and I was able to see that what we read or what we hear about other countries is far more better there than it is here. I was glad to see that they don't treat their people like profit. They don't see their people as commodities. They
But that's
see
why we need to,
as
the message we need to share, that we definitely, it's something that can happen. People pay, what is it, 1% of their taxes, and it goes into housing. It's not something that's impossible to achieve. Yeah. And that's the message we need to deliver to people. And it's not something that's going to cost an exorbitant amount of money, and that's going to exclude people. We need to make sure that we deliver that message, or that it's something that lazy people want their rents paid for, and then they don't want to do anything. We need to make sure that people understand that.
Yeah.
And it affects everything when it comes to housing, education, crime, whether it's crime, want to admit it or not, it affects everyone.
Everything. It does. All of it goes hand in hand, like you said. Yes.
Yeah.
Michael, I don't know if you know about this, but Sunday, because there was no commerce in the city on Sunday, Sia decided that we were going to walk out a community which is about 15 blocks.
Yeah.
And yes. Oh my God, that girl has us like we were soldiers behind her.
She kept us very busy.
Very busy. And then we learned, on that walk, we learned that unions in Vienna are totally different from unions in America.
Yes.
Because we saw almost 30 different constructs of housing that is built by the unions. We saw the Railroad Workers Union. We saw the Laundry Workers Union. We saw the Radio Union. Everybody's name is etched on the building from what year they started until what year the construction ended. You can even look at the constructs in the courtyard and you can see, oh, that's an old gas lamp. But they still keep it there to show you that there's old mixing with the new. And it was so impressive to see 80-year-old, 90-year-old building looking as if they just built 5 years ago.
Yeah.
That was breathtaking. It was mind-boggling.
Yes.
Yeah.
Ladies, thank you so much. This is it's been a pleasure sharing this trip with you, and I miss you all. And,
I love the opera, Michael. Thank you.
One more thing, Michael. I'm so glad that I was able to be part of your dream. That's a blessing when you can be a part of somebody. You can make somebody's dream come true. And it was everything that I thought it would be. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
And my wish, Michael, is that we can get this 421A money and we can do a flagship building like Karl Marx building.
Yeah.
And I hope I'm alive to see Michael's face on that wall and all the things that you have been fighting for, Michael. I love you from the depth of my heart. You are a true gentleman, and I so thank you for including me.
Our last conversation is with 3 legislators who went with us to Vienna. We'll be talking with Assemblymember Marcella Matenas of Brooklyn, Assemblymember Farah Souffrant-Forrest of Brooklyn, and Assemblymember Linda Rosenthal of Manhattan. They are among the 7 legislators who made this field trip with us. You know, we've been back from Vienna, 10 days? It seems like forever. Seems like it was years ago.
Sadly, that's true. I wish we were back there for many reasons.
I do too. It was an amazing trip.
It was.
What's your impressions? What's your takeaway? What do you think? What did you see, and how did you feel about it? And how do you think this might possibly help us develop social housing here in New York State?
There were so many amazing things that we saw. I think for some time I've been feeling like government has us like in a box and we can't think outside the box. And I think Vienna really showed what's capable and what's possible if you have will. So I know for me, it was great to be with a bunch of like-minded folks who have a long-term vision of what's possible and just really feeling re-energized to come back and do the work of the people.
Well said. Farah, what about you?
I think one of the biggest takeaways for me was just seeing how the culture suits a shared vision. This idea that from your housing to the way you treat other people, and the way that you even see the doctor, it's all wrapped around this concept that the vision is we must do it together. If anything, it's not an I, it's definitely an us. And it really shifted my mind as to like what is required to obtain even some of the remote deliverables like universal health care. 45% of your rent stabilized, your housing stock is rent stabilized. That has to come with a shared vision, and that starts with a shift on, is it I or us?
Linda, what about you? What's your takeaway?
No, after I got to navigating the underground system with Michael's help in the first few days, and I got used to it, it just seemed like this is what is possible because we're seeing it with our own eyes. We toured multiple housing structures, like of let's call it municipal housing and public-private housing, and they were all beautiful. They were well kept. There was access to parks. There were services. There were stores, and the community was deeply involved in creating new types of housing. The community is not last there the way it is here in the city, basically. Yeah. And so I thought what they have, some of that is indeed possible here in New York State. And when seeing new numbers about how many warehoused units we have, how many homeless people we have, how many asylum seekers we have, and none of them have housing, I thought back to Vienna and said, we must do something like this here in New York State.
Right, and we visited one project on Tuesday at the rail yards, the former rail yards that is now a thriving city within a city, and talked to the tenants of a building where they were actually involved in the design of the building. And we have a great photograph of you, the three of you, and Julia Salazar and Emily Gallagher on the roof of that building, where the tenants told us they were actually involved from the ground up in questions of how they wanted their project to be designed. A very different approach from what we do here.
Absolutely.
It is very different. And we had a whole portion where we had conversations with urban planner, who is a feminist urban planner. And I was, at first, as a legislator, I'm like, okay, sure. But to see what feminists, first of all, nothing is by happenstance. It's actually by design. And so if you design the process to be inclusive, with first feminism, but that means that it has to be inclusive. It has to be people driven. It has to be very accessible to everyone, whether it be from the meeting structure to just talk about the project, to how you design the chair. What does that mean for an elder person using this space versus a young person, a young female, a young male? Everything just is by a specific design, and whether it's building a city within a city to a playground, it doesn't matter. It has to fit this criteria of it has to meet the people's needs and not corporations or this building's aesthetic. No, it has to meet the needs of the people who it was supposed to serve.
Right.
And like here, you can spot a NYCHA building a mile away because they all look the same, and not that attractive. In Vienna, all the buildings were designed by different architects, so they don't all have to look the same. They don't all have to stand out. This is public housing. Most of their housing is a public housing model, with different provisions for each, but it was just a different attitude, like respect for where people need to live, meeting their needs, and not burdening them with the threat of eviction or harassment all the time, which is something we see here all too often.
Right.
I
And
think, Linda,
the public housing is mixed income.
That's right.
It's not just low income people. It's a very conscious attempt to have people of different income levels living together, which seems to be quite successful. And I think one of the planners we spoke with told us that 80% of Viennese qualify for social housing. Only the most affluent, high-income people do not. I'm sorry, I interrupted someone.
Yes, I just want to echo what Linda said, and something that's so important but so overlooked is the word respect. As communities, we are standing up to the government and their idea of what affordable housing should look like. When we're pushing back, we're talking about things like infrastructure, the concern of bringing in so many people to a community that's already overcrowded, who don't have enough seats for their children to go to school. And when we bring this up, we're spoken to and spoken down to in a way as if we don't know what our communities need. And it was so refreshing to see that that's exactly what leads the development there. When they are building housing, they're thinking about families and children. And so what we've seen a lot is, along with these housing developments that have been developed, that there's also a need for childcare. There's also a need for school, right? And so all these things that we talk about, the infrastructure that's needed, somewhere to go wash your clothes, somewhere to park your bike, right? The fact that we are standing up and saying these things are important and having developers tell us that these things aren't needed is such a refreshing change. And it goes back to what I say, that we're limited in what we think that we can do. And it's just been eye-opening, this experience, on what we deserve and what we're entitled to.
Marcella, even when Marcella brings up this idea of housing must meet the needs, it was insane to me. Like it just was so straightforward. If we have families living in an area, we must plan for the supermarket. We must plan the track to the supermarket. It literally took people who are planning, developers, to follow families, follow them through the neighborhood and see how they use the spaces. And so this need, right, and the respect of your needs then shape transportation patterns. How many meters does this block need to be to accommodate a stroller or a wheelchair or someone with a cane? How do we then build a city and make sure that transportation doesn't just go one stop, but actually wrap around it? So no one has to spend 25 minutes more outside of their home running an errand. So when you come home from work, pick up the kid, go to the supermarket, and have dinner on the table by 6 o'clock. This was all by design. And it's, again, what Marcella is saying and Linda's saying, like this idea of respect of that is important to you, so it is important to us.
Right. You're describing what we saw at Seestadt, and which is this new city within a city built on the site of an old airport on the north side of the Danube River, and designed basically according to the principles of Eva Kyle, the feminist planner that we had a session with. And all of these streets are named after women, with one exception. There's a Janis Joplin Platz, there's a Jane Jacobs Way. Some of the streets are named after Austrian women who fought the Nazis. But there's one place, one square that's named after a man in the entire place, and that's Nelson Mandela Platz. Other than that, it was all women, and clearly designed with families in mind and with children in mind, and the way Farah was just describing. It was quite a remarkable experience. I keep thinking if Hudson Yards had been developed in a different way, and we, instead of this suburban mall that's got plopped down on the west side of Manhattan, if it had been a different vision, what could it have been?
Mike, that's exactly what I was thinking about. Like this idea that we spent millions of dollars for this extension that really led to nowhere for no one. And I don't want to like do the blame game now, but it really is like, wow, we could have done this better. And Vienna wasn't born out of yesterday. It's actually been a process that's been an open process. And it was beautiful to see how the people from nonprofits to activists to actually city officials and city government workers were all saying the same thing. When it comes down to the messaging of this respect for all, the messaging was so straight and so ingrained that everyone worked along that path. So when we talk about we have eco-socialists now, but when we talk about development, having the utilities company then be accountable to the city, having labor be accountable to the workers, all of this was present while we were in our housing delegation tour. But we learned that this all has to come in line, all of it.
One part that was really interesting and that it took a while to wrap our heads around is that profit is not the guiding motive. And we learned about different types of housing. For example, a Mitchell-Lama type, for example, where there's limited profit. And developers who have bought land in the past work with, the government and the community to design a building. And people would say, well, what is their motive or their motivation for working with everyone when the profit they make is minuscule? They're like, well, what do you mean it's the right thing to do?
Right.
That's what you do in society is you take care of people's needs and you build what they need. And it was so alien, although now it's like, yes, that's really the answer.
Very different concept.
Yeah.
And sometimes the people we were asking that, they didn't quite understand why we were asking that. What do you mean? We're not interested in profit. It's not why we're doing this.
And there are developers there who make a profit. That's fine. Mm-hmm. They just don't need billions or, 10 zeros after the first number.
Linda, the part where I was chuckling was when you pay your rent, especially in this Mitchell-Lama-like structure, you know exactly what you're paying for. This is going to the interest on the bank loan. This is going to your utilities. And then eventually you're like, oh, but my rent will fall. And where is that going? Oh, so we can continue doing the great thing that we did with you. And it's like, oh, how refreshing.
That's right. And another thing we learned is that a lot of the reserves are plowed back into developing housing and maintaining housing, unlike what we see here with NYCHA, for example.
Right. No, and it was quite fascinating that these limited profit, you can call them limited profit co-ops. They don't quite call them co-ops there, but after the debt is paid off, the tenants get a rent reduction.
Yeah.
The rent goes
amazing.
Down. I mean, how different is that?
I mean, they really stuck to this idea that in order to develop, they need to develop a larger portion of affordable housing versus market rate. And what they said is like the 2/3 model. And obviously, this is why the 421A program is just not working. It's a failed system. Mm-hmm. As much as they are saying that they're providing affordable housing, the truth is it's just leading to gentrifying more of our communities. The amount of income that you have to earn in order to qualify is not matching the need of the city. And so you can really tell the difference with the way they're looking at their housing and what they're building and the fact that it's actually providing for people versus the failed program of the 421A that, we have to worry about, our people in power that want to we want to revive it. So I think one of the other takeaways about this trip to Vienna is just how exciting it's been to see and witness what's possible. The fact that we're all re-energized to go back to our communities and continue this fight, but the opportunity that we have to talk to folks, to educate them, to share about what we've learned so that we collectively can start putting the pieces in place to allow us to have some of these things as well.
It's a goal that I don't think any person would say is not something we should strive for. I mean, we spoke about, people who are homeless maybe. If someone needs shelter, they will go and the government will find them a place to live.
We saw very few homeless people on the street. I mean,
right.
It wasn't until we'd been there 4 or 5 days that I saw my first homeless person actually panhandling, because apparently they have a good emergency system where if somebody is unhoused, they pretty quickly put them in some kind of, not a shelter, but an apartment.
Right.
Yeah, right. Really quite a different situation.
Yeah.
Well, this has been a great discussion, and I want to thank you all again for joining us in Vienna with your colleagues, and we are looking forward to working with you to develop legislation and policy initiatives that will make it possible for us to actually create social housing that is not treated as a commodity to be bought, traded, and sold and profited from, but it's going to actually give people decent, affordable housing here in New York State. I hope you've enjoyed this program about our field trip to Vienna, and we will be publishing a report, which I hope you will look forward to. Thanks for watching Tenant Action today. We're on every Wednesday at 6 o'clock p.m. Please tune in again next week.